So this is a genuine passion of mine. Is we're all users of banking applications or websites or everything from Google and Facebook through to your online banking on your mobile phone and your iPad. I've got news reader things that I download off of news.com, for example, and all of those things react and work differently, and their experience that I have anyway as a user is the fact that a lot of that stuff comes together at the glass for the first time. I think. Right, remember, I'm not coming from I've got a development background, but I've been out of it for a long time. So from a user experience perspective, I notice when I'm looking at something that there is everything from a Twitter feed to a stock exchange feed to everything's happening and it's coming together for the first time on my iPad. And when the experience is bad, when something's not performing, my immediate reaction is, it's the application I'm using. Is that a fair? Do we all do the same thing? Yeah. So, I look at the application, I go, my banking application's down, or something's, really the truth is, and I'm going to put my technology hat on now for a second, the truth is, I know intuitively that there's a whole bunch of stacks happening just on my mobile phone. And by the way, Blooms that was running in the background is probably consuming a whole bunch of my iPad memory. And by the way, I'm sitting in my lounge room and my router's in so intuitively I know that it's not just the app. How do you measure that stuff? How do you control a non-technology biased person that's using functionality today and manage the user experience that they are having, of which performance I would suggest is probably a sliver. There's probably a whole bunch more. So I wear different hats, and I'll tell you what got me on the trend. We care about it from a vendor perspective, obviously, but what got me on the trend was we were doing some work with Centrelink, DHS, and they've just launched a mobile application for retirement people, and they've launched a mobile application for university people. And I know that retirement people are just going to get fed up and never come back, and university people are going to get on Facebook or iTunes and complain bitterly that the app doesn't work. You know what I'm saying? So there's different demographics, different people, different kind of slicing and dicing of the industries are using all this new technology, and a lot of the interaction with organizations has been funneled down that channel. So it's just an interest to me, and I just thought this would be a perfect forum of people that are, developing applications, performance testing, have a bias for technology. How do we do that? How do we start to care about that stuff today? I want to take what you were doing and almost flip it on its head and look at it from a user's perspective and say, well, I'm using an app, and how do we start to test both performance and availability from the edge, in real time, in a real user mode, and then talk about automation. How do you make sure that, from a testing perspective, that's in place?
So I guess the question, I'm trying to understand the question myself. Are we saying so yes, we do care about the end user experience, right? Not that most development teams understand what end user experience is, just like they don't understand what performance is. Is your question, Kevin, about how do we measure this end user experience for all of our end customers? Or is it how do we measure it before we ship the code out the door?
I think it's a bit of both. So my real question is, we're doing all this testing of our applications. We get the application into iTunes. I'll talk about a customer who will remain nameless, but we get all of the stuff into iTunes. We load up the app in iTunes, and then there's just we get 1-star ratings. All the way down, and absolutely get slated. And that is a brand problem. It's an adoption problem. All of the millions of dollars that went into developing the app in the first place. It's an engagement, a channel engagement problem. What I mean by that is ANZ Bank CIO stood up and said, we've got multiple channels at the moment where we engage our customers, and we're trying to get a handle on each of those channels. But more and more and more, the channel of engagement is digital, right? So how are we capturing the true end user experience of effectively a digital fingerprint, as opposed to someone who's walking in the door and complaining to someone, and then a manager coming around and settling the situation right there. How do we capture that? How do we know what our customers are truly feeling? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand your question right now.
Just interested if you guys know
I
what,
think it's
what,
a very
what
very
we're
valid
doing about
question. I've got my experiences, but what do you guys think? How do we measure it? How do you guys measure it?
What are there tools that you guys are using? Are there? I'm going to put my Compuware hat on just for a moment, and this is, and not talk about tools, but this is what we care about, right? In terms of, I'm going to bring it down to a performance level for a moment, because from my perspective, user experience is about more than performance. You know, it's about functionality. It's about, I'm a banker with one of the big banks, I better not mention it just in case, but I'm a banker with one of the big banks, and the mobile app was phenomenal. Like, I thought it was one of the best mobile applications, and it happened to be my banking application, but it was fast, it was slick, I had 2 clicks to anything that I wanted, and I just felt that it was just a really, really great app. And then they changed it. And it's horrible. You know? So it performs, but my user experience, you know, the stuff that I've got to go through now to do what I used to do really well, has changed, and I'm no longer that happy with it.
Usability.
So part of it's usability, part of it's performance, because what now I notice is that in the past, what used to come onto the, the interface was the 3 things that I needed most every time. You know, get up, check balance, transfer funds. It was just, and it came up, and all this other stuff used to come up in the background, but part of the time I never saw it because I just got through the things that I wanted to do because I knew what to click and where. Now it's changed, and it actually no longer performs as well. So it takes longer for things to load up before I can hit the button. And the experience and the usability's gone down. So when I talk about user experience, part of it I would suggest is usability. But if we leave that on one side for a moment and look at the performance side, I was talking to one of our business partners the other day, and there were 4 things. We got to the point where there were 4 things that were really important about user experience monitoring and performance. And one of them was looking at it from a synthetic transaction perspective. So what they were talking about was they wanted to use tools to do synthetic transactions, simulating users, and looking at what a user was generally getting from a performance perspective. Another part of it was then real user monitoring, in other words, actually capturing what the real user experience is. And the more we talked about it, there were 2 other pieces. One piece was around third parties. So this is like Google feeds and Twitter feeds, and and if you're not monitoring for that or not watching that and looking for that, then there can be impacts of CDNs and ads and things that are hitting that particular site that could be affecting the user experience and the performance. And this is going to test me. The 4th one was
So, can I argue that if you have RAM, real user experience, and please correct me, why do you need anything else?
Great question. So let me try to replay that. So part of it was because these guys are not always online. I'll remember this in a second. So these guys are no longer online because it's the middle of the night. And so the synthetic part of it was 2 things. First and foremost, load testing and saturation. I think it's saturation testing, where from the edge, you could simulate users and you could simulate load and you could simulate spikes. And so synthetic transactions are good for that. Okay. And then the other part of it was, while users are asleep or that there's quiet times or whatever the case may be, synthetic transactions could continue to monitor what the experience would be like, from up to 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning as the real user monitoring stuff came back online.
It's also a controlled baseline, right? So it's a controlled baseline. So you run the same login transaction all the time and it takes 2 seconds. Everyone loads up in the day and it goes from 2 to 2.5 to 3 to 3.5. You know the impact of load on that baseline transaction as well. And you can alert on it.
In reality, you need both.
You do, absolutely.
You need that consistent measurement point.
I'm not sure any of us here can really give you the answer you're looking for, because we tend to concentrate on the testing side, and the closest I get to user experience is response times from the tools, and they don't actually give you the client response but the server response time. if you want the client response time, either you're running a test to get someone to log in and have a look, or you run an automation tool which runs on a client to give you more accurate user timings.
Actually, for SLA compliance, though, for some customers, they will insist that you need to demonstrate that the SLA performance and availability are being met. And some of the smarter business service monitoring tools will give you synthetic transactions, including any third party, slow loaders up and keep the load reports.
So that's a really good point. In fact, the discussion we were having was in the context of SLA management. It's a really good point. And it was around, so what struck me was that we, to what you drew up in terms of, we've got the systems development life cycle and, iterative testing and agile and all that kind of stuff, but who here is actually testing for the user experience, which is all around perceived SLAs? You're not meeting my SLAs.
Some projects need to have that as a deliverable.
Yeah.
So the business service monitoring solution, which produces the SLA reports, which simulate the customer experience, sometimes they're deliverable in some projects.
Right.
It's not an add-on at the end.
Yeah, but that's a really good point. This wasn't. The reason I thought of this was because I think this is a good discussion point for the group. I mean, should we be coming back to your point earlier? If we're trying to be a group of people that are influential in the market, that we're kind of suggesting new and innovative ways of doing things and white papers and all that kind of stuff, is this something that user experience type? Thinking about user experience somewhere in the development life cycle, is that something that we should be espousing, or is it something we should be talking about, or is it something that is really more something that we worry about in production? These are questions. I'm just trying to simulate conversation, I guess.
My 2 cents is, I think at the end of the day, performance is everything about user experience. The user doesn't care whether you're running a mainframe, whether you're running a risk box, whether you're running an x86 server. He doesn't care. He or she doesn't care. If we as performance dudes or the techies, right, or the sales guys don't focus on delivering the end user experience, there's absolutely no use, right? So I think our focus is always about the end user experience. However, I think the key question, as you have asked, is how do we measure it right from, which ties back into that conversation, from dev to post-prod, post-go live. And I haven't seen any consistency, right, in the availability of tools, processes, and methodology. And I think, Zoltan, this goes back, right? And we need to do something about this ourselves to make it better, not just for our customers, but ourselves, is the fact that our customers perceive this as rocket science. They perceive all of this as rocket science, right? As a result of which, right, most of this never gets done. So is it required? I think it's highly essential. And I think user experience, performance is all about delivering an acceptable user experience, depending upon what quality of user experience you want to deliver. And there might be 2 applications with the same purpose, but the customers might not be willing to spend that kind of money. So I guess it's really important. The question is, how simple can we make it? Because unless we focus on making performance simple, it's only going to remain the domain of us techies, right?
And I think Trevor,
No, go ahead.
I think Trevor had a point around how simple can we make it, because I know HP has a suite of products that caters to at least 3 quadrants that I've seen, like the synthetic transactions, around the third party sort of end user experience testing. But obviously it's too complicated, and it comes at for an arm and a leg to have that licenses and the software suite installed for the application. So is it simple? Probably not, to configure it and keep it running. But if something was given to the customer in a lot more easy or simplistic manner, I think that would change things the way we look at it. Yeah.
Is this something that you would outsource? Is performance something you would outsource? And what I mean by that is, you can outsource testing. If an organisation was able to come along and say, look, part of performance is the tooling, part of it is the, what is it that we're trying to meet in terms of performance monitoring and management and SLAs and all that kind of stuff, and being able to consult on some of that stuff in terms of best practice. Part of it, I would suggest, would be incident management. So a red light goes on a dash, no matter what tool you're using. What next? Someone's got to go, okay, I've got to go and engage someone, I've got to start a process of, incident management, I've got to go and triage what the problem was, I've got to go and fix the problem, get back, test the fact that it's now fixed, get back into production, make sure that, that whole cycle, is that something that you think organisations would outsource and say, we don't do it by the way, but is that something you think organisations would say, if someone could come along and actually be my performance management outsourcer, and outsource is probably the wrong word, but you know what I'm saying, so almost like a managed service. Come along and say, we can do this for you, we can do the incident management for you, we can take care of the tooling for you, best practices and all that kind of stuff, and keep up with the industry while you guys do what you guys do best, which is actually develop new functionality and go to market. I don't know. Would that be-
I'd say there's a number of CIOs who would do that if they thought it was going to save their bottom line.
I don't want to see those who would do it if they would save their bottom.
Well, they do that too.
In the UK that actually has done that. So I know an example of where that has happened. Yeah. So they outsource their hosting, they outsource their app support, they outsource their network, both LAN and WAN to different companies, all different companies, right? And then they actually outsourced service management, who looked after performance management as well.
So it was part of service.
So service management looked after change incident between all those four groups and managed that whole life cycle. When I first went in there, it was absolute chaos. But it was funny, the vendors actually worked quite well together, even though they all competed with each other. So it was quite good.
Yeah.
So it can work.
Yeah. Part of where this is coming from as well is we have had a number of opportunities from a vendor perspective where we've actually seen on iTunes a new release of an application that's just been slammed. And we've literally just gone to the particular organisation and said, well, we can actually show you proof of concept on this. It takes 2 days. We can load up, in this case, Dynatrace, and we were able to show a user ID on iTunes who'd given them sort of 1 star and complained, in paragraphs about the particular app. And we were able to show that user ID and the transaction that they did all the way through the infrastructure down to the line of code, the method that was instantiated that failed. And that's the sort of user experience monitoring, but it's kind of like looking at it through the lens of the user rather than the lens of the app, if that makes any sense.
Do you want to summarize
Sum it up.
this? Do you want to summarize all of them?
Do I want to summarise all of that? I think that was just a bunch of thoughts around how do you encapsulate user experience, what's critical to user experience, and I would suggest obviously usability is absolutely one of those. Performance is a massive part of what user experience really is all about. This is a bunch of gurus in the performance space, and the real question is how are we monitoring in real time the user experience, all 4 aspects of that. But more importantly, how do we bubble that up into the life cycle? And are there tools and things that can capture that in test and dev, where we can start to predict user experience as much as performance? Because I think performance ultimately is about how an application is used by the user and performing for the user.
I think we probably need to talk about this a little bit more in our forthcoming sessions. And probably, we could have, while we want CMG to be very vendor agnostic, right? I think, we need to give individuals an opportunity and vendors an opportunity to help us learn their tools as well, right? And this is open to everyone, right? Because I think, most of us, and at least me, I've never used any of these tools to vendor monitoring, right? We do a lot of testing, we do a lot of diagnostics, we do a lot of optimization, but we never get involved for any monitoring. I don't know. Have you guys been involved in any monitoring stuff?
Not. We actually, my team is looking after performance testing, but we had a monitoring team who had this tool set, the HP BSM, that for the synthetic monitoring, and the HP RAM, that's called real user monitoring tool.
Yep.
So what we did was we collaborated with them, got for lots of workload monitoring, we had to get some inputs from them. So we used to get figures for response time from synthetic from earlier release. So they basically worked in collaboration. Something like we used to make up scripts, they used to upload it onto the live system with only read-only transaction, because you normally won't have synthetic transaction with write access. You would not be creating a ticket on a production environment. So the BSM worked on almost 60 different locations across the globe. We had around 60 different probes, and used to get to know or what geographies are having high response time because of network latencies and all. So that kind of inputs we used to get from them. We also used to monitor through RUM what's the end user experience for that particular application. And this inputs gets feeded back to our workload modeling, and then for any new release we used to basically test it out using this inputs that we had.
So that's interesting. So the takeaway there for me anyway was that you actually had a group within the organisation that was the performance group. So my question around, would you outsource that? I mean, you were effectively outsourcing that to a group within the organisation. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, HPBC is good, but it's big and fat, and it's really only for enterprises. And really only for enterprises who are already a HP shop, otherwise
Yeah.
they learn to use these things.
Right.
That's right.
There is a SaaS version, quite different. I work for an HP partner.
That's okay. We love our partners.
We have that talk too. We have a better version of that talk.
I'll tell
So
you,
look for some great partners.
in most cases where we're in a situation where we do the testing and then it's thrown over the wall, goes into production, never to be seen again. And that's something that's been flagged by Trevor. Like as a group, we'd like to break that wall down and be involved in what happens in production and assist with it and have visibility of that. So it's something we can,
Absolutely.
I think, would like to work on as a group.
So that is that around that is the DevOps kind of.
That's not really DevOps. So
Oh, isn't it?
no, so DevOps is definitely ops and dev working together as a one team.
Yeah.
So in organisations where I've seen DevOps work really well, they've taken the ops guys who work in production and moved them to dev and swapped it. At least a couple of guys and rotate.
Yeah.
And then that works seamlessly because the guys who do dev work understand the operational problems in production. And they've already seen them, so they can go and fix them. And generally they rotate so they don't get too stale. But that's definitely what I've seen from what you're talking about more is the typical ops dev silos, where dev will do all the testing, get in production, and just go, oh, we meet all that functionality, throw it at the fence. And then watch it burn and crash and get on fire on the other side, and then watch these guys work 16-hour days trying to deal with production problems.
Okay, so the story I tell during the pre-sales cycle is around the performance life cycle. So we go, okay, so we can do a great job of performance testing, measure response times in a non-production environment. Let's reuse all of our performance testing assets for production monitoring. Let's have that feedback cycle. Let's use real user monitoring to see what the workload that we're actually seeing in prod is. Is that actually higher than what we tested with? In which case we've got a problem. Is it massively lower? How do they compare? How do the response times we're seeing in prod compare to what we measured in test? And just have that feedback cycle.
One of the questions that's really interesting, and one of the questions that got asked earlier, I think you might have asked it, was the how mature are organisations that you're working with in Australia in that particular space, being able to do all that?
It really depends. That conversation is a lot simpler when they've already bought the tooling.
Yeah.
Because when you're trying to, you go, okay, great, we've sold performance testing, and we'd like to buy this other thing as well. Like, that's a harder conversation than let's just spend a few days.
Implementing what you've already got.
Yeah, so it depends on the organisation. Somewhere like Telstra, it's a lot easier because they already own everything. Somewhere that doesn't, it's a harder conversation unless we push a SaaS type solution, in which case, small dollars, quick wins.
We don't see it happen very often with that process. And there seems to be very little regression testing of performance. They regression test functionality, but not performance of.
As I
They
said,
should do it every cycle.
there's probably 10 to 20% of our customers that do that. Well, some of them try, and it also comes down to application by application.
Yeah.
So for some key applications, they'll do it very, very well. For other applications, they'll do it maybe on a key release.
Okay.
And it depends.
Okay,
So-
cool.
And in an enterprise, you won't have an ops group, you'll have 6 or 7. And they'll have different preferences, different toolkits, different line management.
Well, hopefully not different line management.
Not-
Hopefully not two different line management.
not
But tools can be,
You'll have
you're right, tools.
storage, network, server operation.
Absolutely,
Windows,
absolutely.
Linux, networks.
Oh no, their immediate advantages might be different. Hopefully there's not like, in the case of Telstra Optus, like one of the banks, I guess there's probably 4 levels.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's not too far removed with a lot of organisations.
They have a wonderful ops, but then you've got the flavours, the storage network, whatever, so it's pretty big. You're not going to get one solution
Yeah.
that will fit
No.
into that.
Might have ops teams for OSS and BSS.
Yeah, these completely different tooling. Right. Those customers were already neighbours.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, so thanks for that, Kev, that was really nice. I think, user experience is definitely something that we would like to investigate and probably talk about a little bit more. And I think this, this also talks about the fact that we probably need to look at tools and understand those tools better ourselves as performance guys. And that will come, we'll talk about it, we'll get that discussion going on the meeting. Thank you.
I think these topics are really interesting, but I think I think that